The calluses on a woman's hands will tell you more about her than the cut of her dress ever could. In Spruce Hollow, they called Ingrid, the tanner's girl, in the way people say something they think is an insult. Rough edges, lye stains, the permanent smell of cured hide that followed her like a second shadow. They called her younger sister Celia a blessing, with her butter-colored hair and her piano hands that had never once touched raw hide. When Rafe came down from the Selkirks that October carrying a season's worth of prime beaver and wolf pelt, every soul in Spruce Hollow could already see how the story ended. They had written it in their heads before he'd even tied his horse. They were wrong, every last one of them. Sometimes a man who's spent 4 years above the snowline stops wanting what's pretty. He starts needing what's real. The first frost of the season had crept down from the peaks 3 days ahead of schedule, and Rafe came with it. He arrived the way he always arrived, alone, unhurried, his big roan pack horse loaded heavy with bundled pelts, his breath making clouds in the grey October air. His beard had grown out from July, and his canvas coat was patched at both elbows with pieces of different-coloured leather that didn't match and weren't meant to. He tied the horse at Anchor's trading post and walked inside without looking at anyone on the boardwalk. The post smelled of coal oil, dried beans, and the particular sweetness of plug tobacco left out too long. Rafe stood in the doorway for a second while his eyes adjusted. Behind the counter, old Anchor was weighing out flour for a woman in a good coat. At the back, near the iron stove that threw too much heat, a girl in a pale yellow dress was arranging bolts of calico on a shelf, humming something tuneless. That was Celia. She heard him come in. Of course she did. A man Rafe's size didn't enter a room quietly, no matter how carefully he moved. She turned from the shelf, let the bolt of fabric rest against her hip, and smiled. It was a practiced smile. Rafe had seen the same expression on horses at auction, the way a seller positions the animal to catch the light. "You must be the trapper," she said, her voice shaped carefully for carrying. "Papa mentioned you'd be coming down for the season." Rafe looked at her hands, white, soft, the kind of hands that hadn't done anything in particular. "Got pelts?" he said. His voice had gone rusty from disuse. "Need flour, salt, powder, and 5 pounds of coffee." Anchor left the woman in the good coat and moved to the counter, rubbing his hands together. His eyes went to the pack horse through the window and sharpened with interest. Then the back door opened. It swung wide, not with the careful nudge of someone minding their entrance, but with the kind of push a person gives when their arms are full and they haven't got a hand free. Ingrid backed through it, dragging a wooden-framed stretching rack taller than herself, the hide on it still damp and smelling strongly of the tannin pit. "Anchor, the sorrel's rack is done," she said, not looking up. "I need somewhere to hang it that's not the back shed. The roof's leaking again on the east side." She finally turned. She saw Rafe. She didn't smile. She didn't arrange herself in the light. She wiped her hand across her forehead, leaving a faint brownish smear, and looked at him with a gaze that was completely flat and entirely direct. "Sorry," she said. "Didn't know you had a customer." "Put that somewhere useful and come back," Anchor said, with the particular irritation of a man who has learned to speak to someone like furniture. Rafe didn't watch Celia. He watched Ingrid wrestle the rack through the narrow space between the counter and the shelves, navigating it with the quiet competence of someone who has done an awkward physical thing 1,000 times and stopped finding it dramatic. She wore a tanner's apron over a heavy flannel shirt. Her hair was dark and kept back with a strip of rawhide. Her forearms, where she'd pushed the sleeves up, were thick with muscle and crossed with old pale scars. The kind lie makes when it gets somewhere it shouldn't. She didn't look at him. Again, she propped the rack against the far wall, checked the tension in the hide with one thumb, and walked back toward the door she'd come through. "Ingrid," Rafe said. She stopped, turned her head slowly, the way a person does when they're not expecting to be addressed and aren't sure they heard right. Is the sorrel pelt from this season? A pause. 2 weeks ago. Good cure on it. I don't do bad cures, she said and walked out. Anka let out a small apologetic laugh and began to stack Rafe's order on the counter. Celia had drifted closer, the bolt of calico replaced by nothing at all. You'll have to forgive Ingrid, she said lightly. She spent so much time in the tannery since our father passed. It's made her a little. She searched for the word with a delicate little movement of her fingers. Abrupt. Rafe was counting out coin. Your father's tannery. Was. It's hers now, more or less. Papa left it to both of us, but... Celia made a small gesture that suggested some facts were beneath comment. Well, you've met her. Rafe set the coin down and looked at Celia for the first time directly. She met his gaze with practiced warmth. He saw the calculation in it, quick and neat, and not particularly concealed. Dinner, Anka said, folding the coin off the counter. We'd be honored if you'd join us. Celia sets a fine table. Rafe looked at the door Ingrid had gone through. I'll come, he said. The Anka house sat behind the trading post connected by a short, covered walkway that smelled of sawdust and old boot leather. The parlour was warm to the point of suffocation. Celia had changed into a dress the colour of winter sky and sat across from Rafe at a table set with the kind of china that didn't match the room around it. Too fine, too fragile, like an argument someone was trying to make about what the family was. Anka talked, Celia contributed, Rafe ate the bread and said very little. At some point, when the soup had been cleared and the main course had not yet appeared, Anka mentioned, with an air of explaining something unpleasant, that Ingrid ate in the kitchen. She prefers it, Celia said quickly. She's not comfortable with. She waved at the room. All this. Rafe set his spoon down. He got up without a word, crossed the parlour to the kitchen door, and pushed it open. The kitchen was twice as warm as the parlour, and half as decorated. Ingrid sat at the end of the work table eating a bowl of stew, her apron still on. A piece of chalk on the table beside her, where she'd been tallying something in a ledger before the food arrived. She looked up at him standing in the doorway. There's room at the table, Rafe said. The lines of Ingrid's face didn't change, but something in her eyes did, a quick shift, like a flame in a draught. I eat in here. Not tonight. He went back to the parlour, picked up his own chair, carried it to the far side of the table, and set it down next to the empty place beside him. He didn't say anything else. He sat back down. There was a silence in the parlour, so thick it had texture. Then the kitchen door opened. Ingrid came through, carrying her bowl. She sat in the chair Rafe had moved and ate without speaking. Her back straight, her eyes on her food. Celia stared at her plate. Anka developed a sudden interest in the peppermill. Rafe ate the stew. It was better than anything he'd tasted in 8 months. Halfway through the meal, without looking at her, he said quietly, "Lie burn on your left wrist is old. The one on your right is new." Ingrid's spoon paused for half a second. She didn't look at him. Concentration vat, spilled, 3 weeks back. Got anything on it? Salt and tallow. I have something better. Spruce, pitch and yarrow. Works on chemical burns, smells foul. Ingrid finally turned her head and looked at him. He was still looking at his bowl. How do you know that? She asked. Scalded my whole right hand on a camp pot 2 years ago. Above the snow line there's no doctor. You learn what works. The edge of Ingrid's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. She turned back to her food and finished the meal without speaking, but she didn't leave early. She stayed until Anka pushed back his chair and announced he was tired. Word got around Spruce Hollow, the way it always did, sideways, through whispers at the well and half-sentences in the dry goods aisle. By the second morning, people knew Rafe had more gold than he let on, and a winter cabin in the high Selkirks with nobody in it. They also knew from Celia that he'd been strange at dinner, impolite, cold. Rafe didn't notice any of this. He had come down for supplies and a specific kind of company. And he was still deciding whether he'd found it. The harvest social happened in the community hall on the third night. It was the kind of event held not because anyone particularly wanted it, but because a small settlement in the mountains required reasons to believe it was still civilized. There was a fiddle player who kept one eye on the door in case his wife showed up. There was a punch that was mostly water, and a keg behind the hall that wasn't. Rafe stood near the far wall with a cup of the real thing, and watched the room with the blank, alert attention of a man accustomed to watching tree lines. Celia found him within 10 minutes. She was bright in a red dress, and she put her hand on his arm, the way people lay claim to something in public. "You haven't danced," she said. "No," Rafe said. "You could." "I could shovel the livery too. I choose not to." Celia's smile held, but only by effort. Around them, people were watching. The town needed this particular story to resolve itself the way they expected, and it wasn't cooperating. "Mr. Rafe," she said, lowering her voice, "I think you misunderstand what I'm offering." "I understand exactly," he said. "I'm saying no." He put his cup down on the windowsill and walked out the side door before she could regroup. The cold outside was a relief. He walked away from the light, around the back of the hall, and stopped. There was a sound, not the fiddle, something else, a rhythmic, wet scraping he knew from long habit, a knife working on damp hide. He followed it. Behind the hall, connected to the alley behind the trading post by a fence line, was a lean-to shed where Ingrid did her overflow work when the main tannery was full. A single lantern hung from a nail. She was standing over a beaver pelt, stretched on a flat board, drawing a scraping knife in long, careful strokes from the center out. Her sleeves were pushed up. Her hair had escaped its rawhide tie on one side and hung loose against her cheek. She heard his boot on the gravel and stopped, looked sideways. "Lost?" she said. "No." He stepped into the lantern light and looked at what she was doing. He recognized the technique, the angle of the blade, the direction of the stroke. "Good work. Careful." "You weren't at the social," he said. Ingrid went back to scraping. "I have 3 pelts to finish before the freeze sets in. Celia will sit and dance and tell the same 3 stories and think she's lived a life. I'll be ready for spring." She said it without heat, the way a person states weather. Rafe crossed his arms and leaned against the shed frame. He watched her hands moving across the hide, the left one pressing the board steady, the right one drawing the blade. He watched the muscle in her forearm work. The new burn on her wrist caught the lantern light. "Your knife's pulling," he said. "Edge is angled too far. Town grindstone is broken." He reached to his hip and took out a short-bladed crooked knife from its sheath. He held it out to her. Ingrid looked at it. Then she took it, turned it in her hand, ran her thumb lightly across the edge. She applied it to the hide, and the blade moved through the fibers like water through a cracked dam. "Good steel," she said. "Bought it from a Métis trapper on the Kootenay 8 years ago. Best edge I've ever owned." She handed it back. He hadn't expected that. He took it. "Why aren't you in there?" Ingrid said, not unkindly. "Celia would go anywhere you wanted. Clean house, steady hands at a table. She'd go to Vancouver. She'd go somewhere with curtains and gas lamps." Rafe paused. She would not make it through a January in the Selkirks. Ingrid's scraping hand stopped. "I live at 4,200 feet, Rafe said, his voice even, almost conversational. "Snow stays on the ground until May. The nearest settlement is a day and a half on horseback in good conditions. When things break, you fix them, or you do without. When you're sick, you treat yourself, or you wait it out." He paused. "Your sister is a good woman for the life she's made here. She would die up there. And she would hate me for it before the end." Ingrid was still. She was looking at the pelt, but not seeing it. "I'm leaving at first light on Thursday," Rafe said. I bought 2 new pack horses. I have enough flour and salt and shot to last the winter. He was quiet for a moment. What I don't have is someone who knows what they're doing. Ingrid turned and looked at him. In the lantern light, the scar on her wrist was a pale ridge, the new burn still dark and angry above it. She looked at him with eyes the color of creek water over slate. Grey-green, sharp, impossible to read. You're not serious, she said. I don't say things I don't mean. You don't know me. I know your work. I know you were down here in the dark, doing something useful, while the rest of this town was trying to be something it isn't. He didn't move closer. He didn't reach for her. I know you stayed at that dinner table, even though every person in that room made you feel like you had no right to be there. You didn't flinch and you didn't leave early. His voice dropped. That's the kind of thing a person either has or they don't. The lantern swayed in a gust of wind off the mountain. Spruce needles fell like rain on the shed roof. Thursday, Ingrid said finally, her voice careful as a good knife stroke. First light. He nodded once and walked back into the dark. She stood in the lean-to for a long time. After he was gone, her hands resting on the pelt, her heart making a noise in her chest she hadn't heard in years. Ingrid did not sleep. She sat on the edge of her cot in the room above the trading post and looked at the one canvas bag on her floor. When she was done looking at it, she packed it. 2 shirts, her winter trousers, the leather apron she'd made herself from the scraps of her first solo cure, her father's bone-handled draw knife, the tin of pine pitch salve she'd been refilling from her own recipe since the lye accident. She could hear Celia through the wall, moving around, making small, deliberate noises that meant she was awake and aware, and waiting for acknowledgement. Ingrid didn't give it to her. She laced her boots and went downstairs before the grey of the sky could become proper morning. Celia was already in the kitchen. She looked at the bag in Ingrid's hand, and her face went through a whole conversation without involving her mouth. He doesn't want a wife, Celia said finally. He wants someone to run his camp for free. Maybe, Ingrid said. You'll be up there all winter, with a man you've known for 3 days. I've known worse men longer. Celia's jaw tightened. The soft, careful face she wore for company went away completely. You're doing this to embarrass me, she said, in front of the whole town. You're choosing this on purpose, to make me look. I'm choosing it, Ingrid said, because it's the first thing in 4 years that's looked like a life. She put her hand on the door. You'll come back by Christmas, Celia said. Her voice changed again, softer, almost a question. The cold will be too much. You'll come back. Ingrid looked at her sister. The good dress, the careful hair, the hands that had never once done the tannery work that had put food on both their plates. She felt something, but it wasn't jealousy, and it wasn't pity. It was a kind of mournful clarity, the way you feel when you understand something about someone that they don't understand about themselves. Take care of the sorrel pelt, Ingrid said. It needs another week before it comes off the rack. She walked out. Rafe was at the end of the road, where the track out of Spruce Hollow met the tree line. He had the 3 horses loaded, the packs covered with waxed canvas against the morning damp. He was working a knot on one of the pannier straps, and didn't look up when her boots hit the hard-packed dirt. You're early, he said. Didn't sleep. Neither did I. He finished the knot and looked at her bag. That all? What else would I need? He almost smiled. She was fairly sure of it, in the way a person is sure of something in peripheral vision. Gone when you look directly. He handed her the lead rope of the middle pack horse and took the front horse himself. He didn't offer his arm. He didn't offer advice. He just turned north and walked. The trail climbed hard from the first 100 yards. Spruce Hollow fell away below them. In pieces the trading post roof, the white plank of the community hall, the smoke from a dozen chimneys. that would burn down to nothing before anyone in that town gave Ingrid a second thought. She didn't look back. The first day on the trail was silence and altitude. The second was worse. The track crossed 2 creek drainages, climbed a long switchback through old-growth spruce that blocked the sky, and by noon they were above the frost line, moving through snow that hadn't thawed since March. She didn't slow down. She watched the set of Rafe's shoulders ahead of her. The way he moved his feet on the iced-over sections, the weight back, the steps short and deliberate, and she did the same. The third day, they hit the river. The Coldwater Fork ran high in October, fed by the melt from the high snowpack, and the crossing was a pair of raw spruce logs. Someone had felled across the narrows, planked over with rough boards. It looked passable. Rafe crossed first with the led horse, moving slow, testing each plank. Ingrid followed with the middle horse. She was 3/4 of the way across when the board under the horse's left foreleg gave. Not a crack, a soft, wet collapse. The wood rotten through beneath its frost-hardened surface. The horse lurched sideways, its feet scrambling, and the sudden shift of weight on the rope yanked Ingrid's arms and took her off her feet. She went down hard on one knee on the planks. The horse slid further, its hindquarters swinging toward the gap, and the roar of the current below came up through the boards into her palms. She didn't let go of the rope. She dug the toes of her boots into the gap between 2 boards, found perches on a cross brace below, and pulled with everything in her back and shoulders, leaning away from the edge, using her own weight as a counter to the animal's panic. The rope burned through her gloves. Her knee screamed where she'd hit it. "Ingrid," Rafe's voice from the far bank, not panicked, not loud, just clear. "I've got it," she said through her teeth. She kept the tension, kept the angle. The horse scrambled, found the solid plank beside the broken one, and lurched forward. She moved with it, walking it off the bridge onto solid ground, and only when all 4 of its hooves were on the dirt did she let her arms drop. She stood there, breathing hard, her palms red and already blistering from the rope burn. Rafe came and took the horse from her. He checked the animal over quickly. Then he came back and picked up her hands and turned them over in both of his. He didn't say anything. He pulled the pine pitch tin from the inside pocket of his coat. She'd given it to him to pack that morning, and opened it and spread the salve over her palms with his thumb. It stung like being burned all over again. "I should have gone first on that horse too," he said. "I know that bridge. You couldn't have held that one. Not at the angle it went." She looked at him. He was still holding her hands, not looking at the palms anymore, just holding them. "Rafe." He let go. "Let's go," he said, and turned up the trail. She followed, and the mountain closed around them both. The cabin sat in a bowl of granite and old-growth pine, sheltered by a rock escarpment to the north. It was built low and thick, the logs chinked with moss and river clay, the sod roof heavy with early snow, 1 window, 1 door, a massive stone chimney that had been added after the original build, and looked it. When Rafe pushed the door open, the smell hit her. Trapped air, old smoke, the particular dry cold of a space that had been sealed for months. She stepped inside. It was a single room, a heavy plank bed along one wall, piled with furs, a table and 2 chairs of the kind that only coincidentally match. From the low rafters hung snowshoes, leg-hold traps, an oil lantern, bundles of dried yarrow and rosehip. The floor was rough-hewn spruce, worn smooth in a path between the door and the hearth. It was nothing. It was everything. Rafe stood near the hearth, watching her take it in. "It's not," he began. "Where are the cleaning rags?" she said. He stared at her. "And the water bucket." He pointed. She rolled her sleeves up, found the bucket, and went to work. They didn't discuss what the arrangement was, exactly. It organized itself out of necessity, the way a camp always does. Who does what, who takes which side of the fire, who wakes first. Rafe woke before light and built the fire from the banked coals. Ingrid woke minutes after and broke the ice on the water bucket with the handle of her skinning knife. They ate in silence and went to work. She learned the trap lines. She learned which ridges held fox, which creek bends held beaver, which open meadows were worth watching for mule deer in the last light. Rafe taught her nothing directly. He simply moved through the landscape, and she watched and understood, the way she had learned the tannery, not from instruction, but from standing close enough to her father to absorb it through proximity and repetition. He taught her one thing explicitly on the third week, without meaning to. She was at the table with the whetstone and his hunting knife when he came in from the tree line. He stopped inside the door and looked at her. At the angle she was holding the blade, at the direction of her stroke. "Wrong side," he said. She stopped. "I've been sharpening knives since I was 9. Not this one. It's single bevel." He sat across the table and took the knife and showed her. She watched his hands, the patience in them, the particular small knowledge that only comes from making a mistake and learning from it. "Your father teach you the tannery?" he asked, without looking up. "What he could. He died when I was 22. I figured the rest out myself. 4 years of trial and error. More or less, yes." He handed the knife back. "You're good at it." She looked up at him. It was the first direct statement of its kind he had made in 6 weeks. He was already looking at the fire, or pretending to be. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. She went back to the knife. November hit the high Selkirks, with no warning and no grace. One morning the sky was a thin, hard blue, and the next it was the color of old pewter, and the wind came down off the glacier like something with a purpose. Rafe went out to check the far line on a day that turned. He said he'd be back by late afternoon. The clouds built while he was gone, thick and heavy, coming in too fast from the north, and by 2 o'clock Ingrid knew they were wrong. She waited until 3. She put more wood on the fire. She went to the window and scraped the frost off the glass with her fingernail and saw nothing but white. At 4 she went to the door. The cold outside was a living thing. It hit every exposed inch of skin immediately, a burning that went straight to bone. The snow was horizontal, driven by a wind that had no interest in stopping. She could see as far as the edge of the woodshed, no further. She went back inside. She found the coil of hemp rope on the wall. She tied one end to the door handle. She wrapped the other end around her waist twice and knotted it. Then she went out. She couldn't see the tree line. She couldn't see anything. She moved in what she thought was north, toward where the main trail came in, letting the rope pay out slowly behind her. She called his name into the wind, and the wind took it apart. She went to the end of the rope, stood, called again. Nothing. She was turning back when she heard it. Not her name, not any sound she could make out clearly, just something that wasn't the wind. Heavier, irregular. She went toward it, and her outstretched hand hit wool. He was down. Not down the way a person sits. Down the way a person falls and keeps falling and can't find bottom. He was on his hands and knees in the snow, one arm braced, moving in the wrong direction. Ingrid dropped beside him. She got her shoulder under his arm and pushed upright. He weighed twice what she did and was fighting her, weakly and without awareness. "Rafe," she said directly into his ear. His eyes found her face. Something in them, not recognition exactly, just the dim machinery of survival turning toward a sound. She tied the rope to his belt. Then she turned and followed it home. She didn't remember the details clearly afterward, the time it took, the weight of him, the moments when she fell and dragged him forward through the snow and had to find her feet again. She remembered the door. She remembered getting it open. Inside, she stripped his coat, his wet shirt, his boots. His hands were the color of chalk, and his lips had gone blue at the center. She got the furs off the bed and onto the floor by the fire. She got him under them. She watched him shake. It wasn't enough. She pulled off her own outer layers and got under the furs with him, pressing herself against his back, her arms locked over his chest. He was cold, the way stones are cold, a cold that goes past the surface, that's settled in at a cellular level, that takes time. She lay there and gave him her heat and didn't move. Sometime after midnight, the shaking began to slow. By an hour before dawn, it had stopped. By morning, the fever arrived. She didn't leave the cabin for 3 days. She boiled yarrow and willow bark and made him drink it. She kept the fire high enough that the pitch in the logs bubbled. When he threw off the furs, she put them back. When he clamped his jaw shut in his fever sleep, she waited and tried again. On the second night, in the deepest part of the fever, he said something she heard through the half-sleep she'd fallen into on the floor beside him. Didn't think anyone was coming, he said. Not to her, to the ceiling, to whoever lived behind his closed eyes. Too quiet up here, too long quiet. I was always coming, she said. His hand found her wrist in the dark. His grip was weak and trembling, but deliberate. He held on. She let him. On the morning of the 4th day, the wind had died, and the sky outside the window was so blue it hurt. Rafe pushed himself up on one elbow and looked around the cabin with the careful reorienting focus of a man who has been somewhere else and is finding his way back. He looked at Ingrid. She was sitting against the wall with a strip of rawhide in her lap, working the edges of a new lace by feel, her eyes nearly closed. She had dark bruises under them, and her hair was loose and a burn on the back of her hand she didn't remember getting. "You look terrible," he said. His voice was a ruin, but it was his. "You should see yourself," she said. He looked at the furs on the floor, at the wet stack of rags by the basin, at the empty tin of salve. He put it together quietly, the way he did most things, methodically, without expression. He looked at his own hands. The color had come back into them. "You went out into that," he said. "You were out in it first." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a Canada jay landed on the window ledge and was immediately suspicious of its own reflection. "Come here," Rafe said. Ingrid looked up from the rawhide. He didn't explain. He said it again, quietly. She got up and crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed frame. He reached out and put his hand against the side of her face. Not gently, exactly, in the way that word usually means. Carefully, deliberately, the way he handled good steel. She closed her eyes. "Thank you," he said, the way a man says something he means too much to surround it with extra words. She put her hand over his and held it there. Then she stood up and went back to the rawhide. Spring came to the Selkirks the same way it always did, suddenly, and then all at once. The snow went from solid to treacherous to mud in the space of 10 days. The creek below the cabin ran loud and brown with snowmelt. Ingrid was in the yard pulling the winter covers off the woodpile when a horse came up the trail. She heard it before she saw it. She straightened, and Rafe came off the porch behind her, which was how she knew it was worth noticing. The rider was young and soft-looking, and had mud up to his stirrups. He pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of the yard, and looked from Ingrid to Rafe and back again with the expression of a man who has been given a message and is now regretting the errand. "Miss Ingrid?" he tried. "Yes," she said. He produced a letter from his breast pocket. "From your sister. She asked me to ride up." He looked around the yard and the cabin with barely disguised misery. Took 2 days. Celia had written in her careful, schoolgirl hand. She had married in February. A man from Victoria with a position in the railway company. They were settled in a good house in the city. The letter was 3 pages, and the news occupied half of one of them. The rest was the offer. They needed help managing the house. Ingrid could come back. She could have a wage, a proper room, a respectable situation. "I know this winter must have been very hard," Celia wrote. "You don't have to stay." The rider waited. Ingrid folded the letter. She looked at the yard. The firewood she'd stacked herself before the freeze came. The corner of the tannery shed she and Rafe had built from salvaged lumber in late January, so she'd have a proper working space for the spring pelts. The new stretching rack drying against the cabin wall. She looked at Rafe, who was leaning against the fence post with no expression on his face at all. He was watching the tree line, not her, giving her the space to decide without the weight of being observed. He wouldn't ask her to stay. He never pushed anything that needed to move on its own. That was the thing about him. He never made her feel watched. He made her feel considered. There was a difference, and she'd had to come up 4,200 feet to understand what it felt like. She turned to the rider. "Tell her thank you," Ingrid said. "Tell her I'm glad she's settled." She handed the folded letter back. "And tell her I'm not coming." The young man took the letter. He looked at her hands. The new calluses layered over the old ones, the scars pale against her tanned skin, the particular permanent stain of tannin that doesn't entirely wash out. He looked at the cabin, at the yard, at the woodshed. He didn't say what he was thinking, which was the most sensible thing he'd done all trip. He turned his horse and went back down the trail. Ingrid watched him go until the sound of hooves faded into the creak noise below. She picked up the woodpile cover she'd set down and carried it to the shed. When she came back out, Rafe was still at the fence. He was looking at her now, the tree line forgotten. "North face of the roof needs re-chinked before the summer rains," she said. "I know. I can do the lower section. You do the ridge." "Fair enough," he said. She went inside to start the morning fire. He came in behind her, hung his coat on the hook by the door, and sat at the table without being asked. She handed him a cup before the coffee was properly done. She always did. He always took it. He wrapped his scarred hands around the tin and said nothing. Outside, the Selkirks ran on without them, the snow pulling back from the high peaks, the creeks loud and cold and indifferent, the Canada jays arguing in the spruce trees with their usual certainty that they were right about everything. Inside the cabin, two people who had decided on each other without ceremony sat in a silence that had stopped being empty a very long time ago.